Hi guys, today going to be doing something a little different. We'll start with some foam core, and we're going to try and make a golem. Kind of big stone elemental type guy. So after beveling down our base, we're going to grab some styrofoam, and we're going to start cutting chunks. So we'll need a few larger blocks, and then some rectangles for the arms and the legs. And I want this to be a big top-heavy guy with a platform on top, which I'm carving here. And I want him to have like kind of these big arms that dangle down by his sides. And I think that's the fun thing about doing something like this, is you really don't have to go with human proportions. You don't even have to give it 2 arms or 2 legs, you could give it way more, or less. And so with those rectangles of styrofoam, we're just going to start cutting the edges down, beveling them, and rolling some rock texture on with a tinfoil ball. And this styrofoam's never been as good at taking detail, so I'm quite tempted to actually just get a rock from the garden and see if that does a better job with it. And once we've got a crotch and some legs, we're going to glue them together and make a stable base for the torso. And I want to kind of have him pacing forward a little bit, so one leg's going to be forward and the other one's going to be back. And I found it easier to glue both the thighs to the crotch and then the shins onto them, rather than doing one leg and then the other. And I did have to trim a little bit to get the height and the angle right. But that's the benefit of being rocks, is it doesn't need to look super realistic. And then when the legs are done, we can assemble the torso. So I want it to be kind of like an inverted pyramid, so there's going to be a large platform on top, and then narrowing slightly to the waist, and then maybe have a little head poking out as well. So just going to glue these stacks together. And don't worry if stuff looks a bit too rectangular still, it will be blended together and expanded on later. And I did decide to go for a little head as well, kind of a little turtle shaped thing. And then make sure it's about the right height and fits nicely on the base. And then we're going to glue on some fists to the arms, and then the arms to the torso. And these are going to be big sloth-like arms that are going to hang down to the ground. He probably uses them to help walk as well. And if you don't have the right angle for a join, then just trim it down. And the hands, I just wanted to be kind of big rounded boulders. So there's no fingers or any kind of big detail on them. And then I connected them to the torso. And I used a bit more glue here just to keep them a bit more secure. And the actual joint will be covered up in a bit later, so it will have a bit more strength added to it there. And so with all the offcuts, I just started to go around, putting some blobs of glue over the joins, and then putting on the kind of scraps and offcut bits of styrofoam, just to build up some kind of indeterminate mass around the joints, and blend some stuff together. And this will help just make it all look a bit more natural and rocky. And going in with a tinfoil ball, and kind of softening it and blending it all together a bit. Now is the time to connect it to the base, and can start working on adding a bit more mass and height to that base. And an added benefit of having the arms go down to the base is you can use it as another contact point and just make it a bit more secure. So with a bit more foam core and some more of the offcuts of styrofoam, we're just going to put them on the base and add some rocks and extra height and make it a bit more uneven. And these offcuts are really useful, so it's always worth just keeping them because they're really good for adding bulk or just small rocks on other projects. And then mixing up a small batch of sculptor mold, and we're going to use this mainly on the base, but we're also going to use it to lightly blend some of the seams together where they're quite deep. And we want to mix this a little bit better than we normally do, just so we get a slightly more smooth consistency with it. And then going in, smearing it all over the base, blending those rocks in, as well as covering up some of the seams on the rocks. But we don't want to obscure too much of the detail of the rock. And finally, just to add a little bit of detail, behind where the feet are, we're going to add some kind of trenches where the foot has been dragged and is left a kind of worn out area of dirt behind it. Then, grabbing some kind of coarse cork flock and some finer cork flock, we're going to mix that together with some PVA and some black gesso. And we're going to make a basing paste. And we're going to use this to cover the base, as well as add some texture onto the rock, and again, hide some of the joints. So this is where going into some of the deeper crevices with the sculpt mold was useful. But if you didn't, or you missed some, then you could just go in with the ground paste and fill that in now. You could also use something like a texture paste or a Vallejo ground paste, but this stuff is a hell of a lot cheaper. And just using it again to blend the styrofoam together where it's been connected. And building up some kind of dirt and crud that's grown on the elemental, where he's probably pulled himself up out of the earth. And of course, hitting the base, and just giving it all a nice dirt texture. And for the base, going for kind of a sparse, almost kind of barren kind of vibe to it. And just adding a few small rocks while it's still drying. And then once it is dry, going in and giving the whole thing a coat of black gesso. Then, a coat of mid-brown. And we want to hit the rocks, the dirt, and everything at this point, just to give it a nice tying together base colour. Then, for the rocks, we're going to mix together a small amount of black with some white, and we're going to make a nice kind of mid-grey, and go in and paint all the rocks. And it looks quite bright here, but it does darken down when it's dried. And also hitting the rocks on the base as well, and the small pebbles. Then, mixing together some white and the mid-brown, we're going to make a pale sand colour, and give the entire thing a heavy-handed dry brush. And again, it looks a bit bright here, but it does darken down into more of a neutral tone. And primarily hitting where the basing paste was applied, but also giving a slight coat to the rock as well, because it just looks like overblown dirt and wear and tear. And again, helps to tie the model together. Next, we're going to emphasise the rock again, so mixing together a lighter grey paint. And we're going to go in and just dab on some highlights onto the base rocks. And to apply the highlight to the base of the model, we're going to grab some foam. And this you'll usually find in packaging. I got this in a pair of shoes, I believe. And you could just tear a chunk off, get a nice bit of rough texture on one side, and then use it to dab paint on. And this will make some of the flatter surfaces just look a little bit more interesting. And if you want to, you can also rotate the sponge as you dab to get like a slightly different texture effect every time. But for the most part, it'll look fine without. Then, adding a few sparse patches of PVA and some static grass, just very sparingly. Tufts would do pretty much the same job here. And I decided it needed a bit more contrast on the base, so grabbing some of these kind of orangey autumnal leaves, I then attach them to the base, just using a small dab of PVA. Then, to be extra, I added a few more tufts in different colours to the original grass, just to look like small bushes and shrubs. And I kept these in the same kind of yellowy brown palette as the rest of the base. And it's only missing one final touch. There we go. And there we have it. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'll catch you next time.